Well, Sky's chief political correspondent John Craig joins me now. Elected today, in office, here tomorrow. A long-held dream of Boris Johnson.
Yes, indeed. Of course, there are those who say he's been campaigning for this ever since the Brexit referendum in 2016. And critics of Mr Johnson and allies, some allies of the PM, Theresa May, will say he's been disloyal to her for the last 3 years. Now, what's going to happen tomorrow is her final Prime Minister's questions. Always an emotional occasion. You remember when Tony Blair had his last one, David Cameron, often applause. Will Tory MPs shout more? Well, last week they were chanting more. The very MPs have been knifing her in the back for months. Then she will come back here. She will say, presumably an emotional farewell, as Prime Ministers often do. Then she and her husband Philip will get in the car, go to Buckingham Palace. She'll quit. Then we won't see her because she'll go off to her constituency in Maidenhead. Boris Johnson will go to the palace, then he'll come here, and either immediately or shortly afterwards, he will say some words in the street. But the big thing we're all looking for tomorrow, I guess, is his appointments. Now, we learned today the new chief whip is Mark Spencer, big burly farmer from Nottinghamshire, replacing Julian Smith, who's had a torrid time with no majority. He's going to become a Minister of State attending Cabinet. I'm told by a very authoritative source, the Cabinet, 2/3 Leavers, 1/3 Remainers, which is the same, of course, as the margin of victory. Also, there's been a debate about whether Mr Johnson should speak on Thursday in the Commons before Parliament breaks up on Thursday. Now, apparently the parliamentarians in his team were keen for him to do it. The advisers not so keen, said the first big speech should be outside. Anyway, the parliamentarians have won. He's going to make a common speech or a common statement. They're negotiating that with the Speaker at the moment. Look out for some resignation speeches on Thursday from all those malcontents who've quit over the last few days. Now, who's up, who's down? Rising stars are going to join the Cabinet, so we're told. Some of the people at Minister of State level, more ethnic minority MPs. But there'll be comebacks probably for people like Priti Patel. All the people. The clue is, I reckon, all the Boris supporters we've seen on the TV in the last few weeks, they're obviously the trusted ones. They're the ones who'll come into the Cabinet.
And what about the very inner circle? Column inches being written about the tussle for influence over Boris Johnson, that perhaps he's struggling to make decisions for himself. What do we know about where that sphere of influence will go?
Well, there are two camps, because there's the politicians who've been working with him, like Grant Shapps and Gavin Williamson, and those his backers, Ian Duncan Smith, chairman of his campaign, all his supporters in Parliament, and then the backroom people, some of his City Hall people, Sir Edward Lister, a veteran of London local government who's going to be Chief of Staff here. As ever, there are clashes in political parties between the elected politicians and the hired advisers. We've seen that in the Labour Party at the moment, the clashes between the MPs and the advisers around Mr Corbyn. Those sort of clashes will probably continue, but at the moment it looks as though the politicians are winning over the paid advisers.
The politics of power, full of intrigue. John Craig, thank you very much indeed.
Well, our political editor Laura Koonsberg is with me here. So, Laura, it all starts tomorrow for Boris Johnson. Tomorrow's the big day. He appoints his new cabinet. What are you hearing?
Well, tomorrow will be the day when we witness the most brutal thing that happens in British politics. The serving Prime Minister, still Theresa May, comes out and says a farewell in front of the country, and then probably within half an hour or so, Boris Johnson will make the lonely walk up Downing Street and introduce himself to the nation in a way that he didn't do today when he was talking to his party. But as you suggest, for any incoming Prime Minister, the first big task is to appoint their cabinet. If you like, the cabinet's like the index to the book the Prime Minister wants to write about themselves. I'm told tonight that Boris Johnson will promise to hire a record number of female politicians and ethnic minority politicians to have seats around the cabinet table. He's also, I'm told, planning to promote some of the rising generation in the Tory party. Now, those decisions are interesting because they push back at some of the assumptions that people have made about Boris Johnson, that some more traditional Conservatives see him as their ticket to somehow restoring things, the old-fashioned way of doing things. But it will be a fascinating day, and the biggest thing to look out for is how many Brexiteers will he move into senior positions? Because after 3 years of angst, today was the day that the Brexiteers finally took charge.
Well, 3 years of angst, as you say, and Boris Johnson has big challenges ahead.
Not just challenges, nightmares, Fiona. A divided party still, a parliament that's been stuck in stalemate with no real sense of any dramatic movement, however hopeful and optimistic Boris Johnson says he feels right now. But the interesting thing is, again and again, when you talk to his supporters on all sides of the party, because it's important to understand his election to be on the threshold of number 10 does represent an achievement from someone whose career was been in the doldrums, and he's managed to stitch together a coalition in the Tory party itself between people from all sides of the spectrum. But what he has to try to do is say more than things will work because I believe in them. That's what he always wants people to hear. That's the conviction that sort of comes off him in ways when he speaks in public. But conviction and belief can't run a government on their own, and that's going to be his challenge. Can he turn the fine words and rhetoric into something that works for real?
We shall see. Thanks very much.
On the detail. Tomorrow, a big day. Any news about cabinet personalities, who you expect to be in, who out?
So it will be a big day. Boris Johnson will make his appointments in sort of two phases. He'll deliver the bad news in the House of Commons to those he's sacking, and then I expect him to appoint the 6 big jobs in the cabinet. I'd be slightly amazed now if Sajid Javid isn't Chancellor, given how many people close to Boris Johnson think that Sajid Javid will be Chancellor, and also given that pretty much all day he's been trailing Boris Johnson around a bit like a poodle, so it would be frankly a bit humiliating for Sajid Javid if he doesn't end up as Chancellor.
That's reshuffle moments, isn't he?
Equally, there was a bit of a sort of love-in at the end of the contest between Jeremy Hunt and Boris Johnson. So I assume, particularly given this is a very delicate time in terms of international relations, particularly the situation with Iran, I'd be slightly amazed if he didn't keep Jeremy Hunt as Foreign Secretary. The other thing that I am told by people close to Boris Johnson is that Priti Patel will definitely make a return to the cabinet, and a chap called Alak Sharma, who's currently the employment minister, will join the cabinet, probably as housing minister, in my view.
We should very small majorities, we've talked before.
Yeah.
I mean, do we expect that to erode in a few weeks, or has it got at least until September or October?
So there's not going to be a trial of strength before MPs go off on their holidays. He's certainly safe through the summer. But, as you say, he doesn't really have a majority to speak of. The big commitment he made during the campaign was to take the UK out of the EU by the 31st of October. He's only got 100 days to get a deal. Most people on the other side of the channel don't expect him to get a deal, which means, broadly, that the chances are he got a no deal. Parliament will block it. That bloke there is going to make a very important statement tomorrow when he quits about how he's going to block no deal. So, as we said last night, a general election, highly likely.
Highly likely. OK, thank you very much indeed.